I have two daughters, ages 2 and 5. They like to dance, they're very curious, and they ask a lot of questions. Some of these questions revolve around sexual health. Questions like, what makes a boy, what makes a girl? Questions about their own body parts, and questions about what they see on TV. I want my girls to have all the knowledge that they need, but sometimes I'm not so sure about how to approach these subjects or if what I'm saying is right. So for the next 20 minutes, we're going to listen to some experts talk about sex and sexual health and the best ways to approach these subjects with our children.
My name is Dr. Brian Parker. I'm a sexologist and sex educator out of Edmonton. I work for Compass Center for Sexual Wellness. I do tons of sex education in schools, so I teach a lot of youth about sexuality, but I also do this presentation, how to talk to kids about sex for parents. So a common myth about kids and sexuality is that kids are not sexual beings. Is that true or false? That would be false. I always say we're born a sexual being and we die a sexual being. Most kids learn about sex from their peers. However, when we ask kids where do they want to learn about sex, it might surprise you, but they actually say from their parents. Let's explore some tips for parents. So these would be the 10 top tips for parents around talking to youth about sex.
Parenthood is an endeavor that no amount of preparation can truly prepare you for. In one moment, it can feel like we have this whole dance of parenting figured out, only to be met with the next moment that taps us on the shoulders and reminds us that the learning is endless. It reminds us that every child has their own needs, and as the weeks, months, and years pass, those needs are ever evolving, the problems changing, and our list of questions forever growing.
And I think it's really important that the parents know that wherever it is that they're starting from, it's a good place to start. And that everybody makes mistakes and that you can't be an expert right at the very beginning.
The opportunity to start is just always right in front of you. So that, even if you feel like you may have missed the boat because you didn't start when they were small, it's okay. Start now rather than later. And so to me, good sexual health it's very dependent, of course, on age, but I think like a lot of things, as your children grow and develop, it's something that you start to build on from when they're small and work on as they get older. So obviously sexual health for a teenager is very different than sexual health for a 3-year-old. If we start at it early, that, kind of like building a house, you add layers and layers so that by the time you get to those really complicated adolescent issues, you've hopefully got a reasonable base to work on. The easiest way to do that is, of course, to do it when your kids are small. I know I started with my kids before they could even talk. And so even though they may not have understood what you were talking about, you at least got used to saying it. And so for a lot of people, talking about these things is uncomfortable at first. And so it's really easy to do when your kids don't understand you yet, and you can just practice starting to say a few things. So I think that's why it's always better to start a few years ahead of where you think. And it sounds scary because, I'm not sure I want to be talking to my 11-year-old about those types of things, but you really have to. That's where you have to start to get them. So that, and they may look at you like you're crazy. And, Mom, we're not, I can't believe we're not doing that stuff yet. Well, no, you're not, but that's why. I want to get this, I want to start talking to you about this before you are. So that when that time comes, and it always seems to come sooner than we would like as parents, that you're ready, that you have what's important in your head, and that you can stand up for yourself and talk about the things that you believe in, and not always necessarily just go along with what your friends or your peers are pushing you into.
I think probably before either of my kids started school, we sort of, they were curious about where babies come from and how these things work, and so we talked about it. And I had a moment of being like, well, is this too early? Are they going to take this to school and then try to share the knowledge and then it's going to get distorted or upset other parents? But I think not talking about it is worse than talking about it.
Well, I think people should reflect on their own upbringing around sex and sexuality. So we look at, where did we learn about sex? If we went through this room, I bet you we'd all have pretty different stories. So everyone comes from a different place, right? We learn things differently. We maybe learned from friends. We maybe had a conversation with parents. Maybe parents didn't say anything to us, right? So we really have to think about where we got our information. What did parents tell us? And kind of reflect on that as well.
When I reflect on my childhood, I wonder how different things would have been had it felt safe and open to have conversations around sex with my parents. At the time, the thought of speaking with my parents about sex felt embarrassing, but truthfully, we never really had conversations about sex and sexual health. It left a lot of questions that I had to figure out on my own, and now when I think about being a parent, it feels important to create a safe space for me and my children to have open and honest conversations about anything.
All of us who have grown up in faith situations need to examine our own attitudes around faith and sexuality. And if we have something that's hanging us up because of the way we were taught, that's probably a good question to even start asking yourself. Where did I get my sense of sexuality? And is it the way I want to pass it on to my children? Or is there a healthier way? But we know healthy, open, age-appropriate conversations with children help them in their whole realm of sexuality become healthy, productive young people.
So we want to start from birth around proper terminology, really important. If we don't talk about proper terminologies, obviously it means that area is bad, it's not to be discussed.
I think just when you start teaching them about body parts, it just kind of comes out naturally if you're open to it. You know, I think, I know a lot of parents just kind of gloss over it and leave it till later, or like make no mention of genitalia. And really, I think that's where a lot of body shame starts. The fact that, you know, you're not learning about your vulva or your penis the same way you would learn about your elbow. You know, it's just a body part.
I believe that faith and sexual health go hand in hand. But we have to start with our children when they're young, being open about talking, being anatomically correct. And when we talk to our children, being very, don't use strange terms, don't use terms, but age appropriate.
I mean, you start when they're babies, really, right? And correct names for body parts sounds simplistic, but it's so, so important. And I think, you know, we don't spend enough time talking about that openly and freely. With sexual abuse so high, it's so important that kids know correct names for body parts and then begin to understand healthy relationships so they can recognize when something just isn't right.
So teach child your body belongs to you. That's really important because you know, they have to have autonomy over their own body. Also, teach them the difference between good and bad touch, right? Who's allowed to touch you there? Who's allowed to give you a bath? Who can kiss you? You know, all these types of things. So they understand who in their life they can trust, right? Who in their life is allowed to do specific things, right? That's really important for them to understand. And they wouldn't know if we didn't talk about that.
When children are young, they are inquisitive creatures. They want to know what makes a boy and what makes a girl, why I'm a girl and he's a boy, or vice versa. Since the questions have started coming, I've been trying to answer them with honesty and use the proper language and terminology. But as I've been reflecting on the journey of parenthood and trying to learn how to talk about sex, sexuality, and sexual health, I'm also recognizing that as they get older, those identifying questions will become more difficult to answer. The lines of female and male can be blurred, and the topic of sexuality is dynamic and complex. My children are young now, but I want to get these conversations right and be supportive if they ever come up in the future. I always want to be able to communicate from a place of love.
We aren't raising sexually aware, sexually healthy children when we don't have these conversations honestly and openly.
Love your kids, do the best that you can, be open with them, be honest with them, accept them for who they are.
So be honest about stuff. Do not use scare tactics. So scare tactics in sexuality would be things like, if you have sex, you're going to get pregnant. If you have sex, you're going to get someone pregnant. If you have sex, you'll get HIV and die. So obviously there's risks with sexuality, right? Do you think kiddos know about this stuff? Do you think they'll be like, you're full of crap? I don't believe what you're saying. Do you think then they're going to listen to you really easily? No, we got to be honest about this stuff, right? We don't want to use those scare tactics because it will not work.
In our life right now, it can be difficult to feel connected to our children because we're so busy and we're rushing everywhere and we're doing all these things, but that's one of the most important things, is just staying connected and being open. You know, I fully recognize that children aren't always going to want to share these things with us, But I think creating a safe space for them to come to you.
We want to communicate our values. This is a really interesting thing because a lot of times parents will say, you know, my kid should just know how I feel. Like my kid should know that I want them to be abstinent, right? Because of who I am. But they never tell their kid that they expect them to be abstinent, right? Maybe it's part of their culture or religion and they go, this is what our culture or religion says, so that means you have to, right? But they never have those conversations. So when it comes to this, we have to tell our kiddos what we feel about this stuff, what our values and morals and beliefs are around sexuality.
The media bombards us with explicit, unrealistic, and often undignified sexual images and messages. And in this technological and media-savvy world where my 2-year-old knows how to work an iPad and scroll through Netflix, it's hard to stay on top of what your children are watching, what kind of information they're receiving, and what narratives they're learning when it comes to sex, sexuality, and sexual health. Counteracting these messages can be a challenge.
We said look for everyday opportunities. So there's so many situations where sexuality stuff comes up, where relationship stuff comes up, right? So it could be a friend's pregnancy where we talk about where do babies come from? How does that happen, right? So sometimes we can have those conversations a little easier if there's something for us to kind of focus on. And we were kind of mentioning this a little bit earlier, but we were saying like sometimes it's easier to have conversations when there's, you know, it's not like a face-to-face, just sit down, things like this. You wouldn't believe how many times I've heard people say the most kind of in-depth, you know, scary conversations that they've ever had with a loved one, like a parent, is sitting in the car. You're looking forward, moving vehicle, can't jump out or you shouldn't jump out, right? And you're kind of stuck there. And there's a lot of conversations that will happen like that. And we were talking earlier, I'm like, maybe watching the TV, right? Because you have a distraction, there's something else you can do as well. And when it's really hard to talk about, sometimes people will do that, right?
It's hard to know when the time is right, but I think just knowing your child, knowing where your child is at, and having that conversation with them, you can kind of gauge what they're ready for.
So around the talk specifically, listen to them, stay calm as well. So this can be a tough topic to discuss and talk about, but we need to stay as calm as possible and try not to be embarrassed or whatever. If they ask like, where do babies come from? I might say, well, what have you heard? What do you know about that? And like I said, they might know a lot more than you think, right? They might have learned about this in school or in the playground or something like that, right? And they might have great information or really bad information. But if they have some information, then we can go, okay, let's expand on this. And you kind of know their level and where to talk about things, right? So it's a really great little tool that I tell parents, ask them what they know. Because they might know a little more than you think.
I think to try and do your best to just stay relaxed about it. Don't feel like you have to sit there and say, well, you know, your father and I, you know, that it doesn't have to be personalized like that, unless you choose to make it like that. But I think just making sure that you are open to hearing about it and open to questions and open to talking about it. Because, you know, even though there's so much of this out in our media and places like that, there's still a lot of secrecy about it, and I think sometimes kids may not feel like they have good places to come and ask to. So just being open to hearing about it, open to talking about it, and open to bringing in other resources or other people if you feel like you just don't have the knowledge or the background or the comfort to talk about it.
Repeat the conversation. So sometimes we have to say things over and over and over for kiddos to get it. Remember we talked about those privacy kind of settings, the guidelines around nudity and all these types of things. Sometimes it's not a one-time conversation. We have to say it a few times, right? And the more we talk about this stuff, the easier it is to talk about. And the more we talk about it, the more likely they're going to come to us as well. Maybe if there's a problem they're experiencing, the more likely they will come to us.
Being a parent, I often envision what the future holds for my children. Who will they become? What kinds of lives will they lead? What will we walk through together? When the hard conversations come up, what will they be about? How will I react? Will I remember to listen and stay calm? Will I continue to open the conversation even if it seems like no one's listening? Even if it seems like they actually couldn't be bothered?
Also, we should look for help from our community. So if we talked about sex education in schools, right? So support sex education in schools. Make sure teachers are bringing in someone to talk to kiddos about sex, or know our teachers are talking about that, because it's a really common thing that teachers or admin decide that's not important for our kiddos, right? They don't need to learn this stuff, right? Or they can learn this only at home. But we know a lot of kiddos are not learning this at home. So the more they learn from you, from teachers, from schools, the better. So support sex education is really important. And also let them know about resources, so local resources. So we might be in a smaller center that doesn't have a lot of resources, but there's obviously going to be most likely a public health nurse or someone where they could talk to. The Saskatchewan Prevention Institute has tons of resources that are available that we could access. If we're in a bigger center, we could go to, like a sexual health organization agency. Let them know about those places. Let them know if there's, ever questions that they don't think I could answer for them. Well, then they could call a place like this. Maybe it's local or maybe it's a little further away.
And that if you're not sure, you're also totally able to come and talk to your local doctor or nurse practitioner or places like that, where you can get good information and a person to sit down and talk to, because, reading books and things like that is sometimes helpful, but sometimes you need a person who knows what they're talking about too. I think it's okay too, if especially as your kids are getting closer to adolescence, to give them some time one-on-one with the doctor, sometimes to talk about things without you there. Not so much to keep you out of the loop, but sometimes because it allows them the chance to open up and ask some questions that they might have been worried to talk about with you there.
Have some fun. That's, I think, one of the most important things when we talk about sex, because sex is kind of funny, right? It's kind of a fun topic, funny topic. When I teach sex ed to either youth or adults or whoever I'm talking to, I add a lot of jokes. I have lots of fun with the topic area. It makes it a little less stressful, less like, oh, we have to have this talk about, and it makes it so it's easier to talk about, right? We're not sitting there making jokes left, right, and center, and there's no seriousness, because this is a serious topic. We need to make sure that they're getting the message that we're saying, but have some fun with it.
We all want the best for our children, and we want to provide them with all the tools necessary to have confidence in navigating a complex world. These tips can help us create an open and flowing conversation in our everyday lives when discussing sex and sexual health with our children. So let's recap the 10 tips for talking to your children about sex. Tip 1, it's never too late to start. Tip 2, reflect on your own upbringing. Tip 3, use correct language for body parts. Tip 4, be honest. Tip 5, communicate your values. Tip 6, look for everyday opportunities. Tip 7, listen and stay calm. Tip 8, repeat, repeat, repeat. Tip 9, look to your community. Tip 10, have fun.
There are many resources available to help parents talk with their children about sexual health. Bookstores and websites are a good place to start. Choose resources you feel comfortable with. For more information, please visit www.skprevention.ca.